Hi there, this is Christina Jones from the Teaching and Learning Center at El Centro College. In this video, I'm going to give you a brief overview of your responsibility when it comes to making sure that materials you didn't create are accessible. That would be materials like content and tools from publishers and other vendors. I'll also go over some steps you can take to make sure that these types of materials comply with the district's new accessibility policy. To give you a quick refresher, the district adopted a new accessibility policy in December of 2018. The policy states that all district resources in information and communication technology must be accessible. This policy applies to all DCCCD employees, faculty, staff, and administrators. It also applies to both materials that you create and those that you get from publishers, vendors, or any other outside sources. And that latter group is what we'll be going over in this video. Some examples of these types of external materials would be the websites, tools, and technology platforms that we ask our students, fellow employees, and the general public to use. It would also include textbooks and other required course materials, including publisher websites where students access content and submit work. And we would also need to confirm the accessibility of any externally created documents, presentations, videos, and other types of multimedia that we share in the course of our jobs. The reason we need to confirm the accessibility of external content is because, while publishers and vendors should be designing with accessibility in mind, they aren't always doing it. So, unfortunately, we can't just trust that materials and tools are compliant, even if we paid for them. According to the new accessibility policy, it's ultimately your responsibility to confirm that the materials and tools you use are accessible, no matter who created them. Think of it like hosting a dinner party. It doesn't matter if you make the food yourself or order in. Either way, as the host, you're responsible for providing a meal that everyone can eat. The same logic applies to materials and tools we use for teaching, communicating, and sharing information at DCCCD. Whether you create them from scratch or buy them already made, you're still the one responsible for making sure that these resources allow everyone to access the same information, engage in the same interactions, and enjoy the same services. For that reason, if a publisher or vendor can't provide accessible content, you'll either need to switch to a company that can, or make their materials accessible yourself. There are several ways for you to check if externally created content is accessible. For standalone items like a video, a document, or a PowerPoint, you can start by using what you've learned from the accessibility checklist to perform a quick initial assessment. For example, confirm that videos have accurate closed captions and audio-only content has a transcript. Look for tables that have header rows and no merged or split cells. Check to see if hyperlinks use descriptive text instead of the full URL or a phrase like "click here," and so on. You can also run an accessibility check on a document, presentation, or PDF to help identify accessibility issues. Those strategies can help you assess a single piece of content, but they'd be pretty tedious for large quantities of material. Not to mention, they're less than useful for confirming the accessibility of things like web tools and software. For all of those things, you should request a VPAT from the publisher or vendor. VPAT is short for Voluntary Product Accessibility Template. This is a standard form that publishers and vendors can use to document how their product complies with federal guidelines for accessibility. The publisher or vendor fills out the VPAT to show how accessible their product is according to Section 508 standards, and to note any potential deficiencies. As another quick refresher, Section 508 is part of the first major legislation to provide protection for people with disabilities in the United States. Section 508 specifically states that electronic and information technology must be accessible. While the VPAT process is still evolving in DCCCD, here are a few key steps to keep in mind. First, check the district's VPAT database to see if the tools or content you're using have already been submitted and reviewed. You can access the database using the short link dcccd.edu/VPAT database. The items are alphabetical by vendor, and each one has a status and notes that describe the results of the VPAT review. If the product you're using is on the list and marked as accessible, you can stop with step 1. If your product wasn't on the list, the second step is to request a VPAT from the vendor or publisher to confirm that their content is accessible to people with disabilities. The publisher and vendor page of the accessibility checklist has an email template that you can use to make this request quickly and easily. You can access the checklist by using the short link dcccd.edu/accessibility checklist. A VPAT is a fairly technical document, so you'll likely want some help interpreting it once you receive it. Once you get a VPAT back from a publisher or vendor, use the short link dcccd.edu/VPAT submit to submit your VPAT for review by district staff. An assistive technology specialist will review the VPAT and get back to you with the results. If you want to know more about VPATs, you can start by visiting the publisher and vendor page of the accessibility checklist. The page will be updated with new information if anything about the process changes. If you have any questions or need any help with the VPAT process, you can also email the District Accessibility Support Team at accessibility@dcccd.edu. If you contact a publisher or vendor and they have questions about how to complete a VPAT or how to make their content accessible, there are a number of web accessibility vendors that they can reach out to for assistance. The publisher and vendor page of the accessibility checklist has a link to a list of possible vendors they could work with. Here are a few other tips to help you out with the VPAT process. First, ask for a VPAT as soon as possible. Remember, it's ultimately your responsibility to confirm that any materials and tools you use for instruction, communication, or information sharing are accessible, which means that you will need to resolve any accessibility issues that arise if the content creator won't. So the sooner you know whether something is accessible, the sooner you can either stop worrying or start looking for an alternative that won't require you to do all that work. Second, when you submit your VPAT request to a publisher or vendor, always clarify what you mean by accessibility. It's not uncommon for people to be unfamiliar with accessibility or to think it means something completely different. Personally, I've had several people confidently assure me that of course their content is accessible because you can access it on a laptop, a tablet, or a mobile phone. Which is nice to know, but not exactly what I was looking for. To save yourself time, use the magic words from the email template on the accessibility checklist. I need to know if the content you provide is accessible to people with disabilities, ADA compliant, and follows Federal Section 508 and Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. It's entirely possible the person you're emailing won't be familiar with all of those things either, but at least you'll have pointed them in the right direction. And the accessibility checklist email template has hyperlinks to more information if they need it. Third, follow up if you don't receive a timely answer to your VPAT request. Just sending the request doesn't fulfill your responsibility to ensure that the materials you share are accessible, and you want to know as soon as possible if you're going to have to switch to another content provider. Fourth, see if other people in your department, your college, or your discipline across the colleges are using the same materials or tools. Collectively, our district represents a significant amount of purchasing power. If we work together, it's more likely we can use the power of those numbers to get publishers and vendors to move quickly to make their products accessible. Collaboration will also save time and avoid redundant requests. And finally, save your initial VPAT request email and all your following communications about it. Since accessibility is now a district policy requirement, it could be helpful to have documentation showing the progress you're making towards compliance. And that's all the information and tips I have for you. Let's close out by recapping the most important takeaways. First, even if you didn't create something, it still must be accessible if you share it at DCCCD. This means that publisher and vendor materials have to meet the same accessibility requirements as your own materials. It's also your responsibility to confirm that any external content and tools you share are accessible. For standalone videos, documents, or presentations, you could confirm accessibility by reviewing the materials yourself or with the help of another knowledgeable person. But for tools and for collections of content, like textbooks and course materials, you should request a voluntary product accessibility template. Then you'll need to submit that VPAT for review by the district. If it turns out that the publisher or vendor content won't meet accessibility requirements, your options are switch to a company that can provide accessible content or make the existing materials accessible yourself. To learn more about accessibility, visit the district's full accessibility checklist at dcccd.edu/accessibility checklist. The checklist includes publisher and vendor content, but it also covers 9 other best practices that will help make your materials accessible to people with disabilities and more effective for everyone. And, if you'd like, you can also access this PowerPoint online. Just use the short link dcccd.edu/A11Y-15 to access this presentation, as well as all the others in the 15-minute accessibility video series. Thanks so much for watching.